When you open up the news, I mean, any day, you see conflict everywhere. It's just constant. You see these ideological clashes, arguments over borders, historical grievances that are just exploding in real time.
And we're always taught the same story, aren't we? That war is what happens when diplomacy fails.
Exactly. That it's this tragic but sort of unavoidable binary struggle. You have side A versus side B, that's it.
But what if that whole frame is wrong? I mean, fundamentally misleading.
What if the chaos we're watching isn't a failure state at all? What if? What if it's a product, a highly refined, deliberately engineered product?
And that's where our sources today really compel us to look past smoke and mirrors, past the political narrative.
So we're not talking about morality or ideology anymore?
Not primarily, no. The idea is to shift the analysis to pure mechanics, to economics. We need to start looking for the hidden architecture of profit that underpins these persistent conflicts.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Today, we are doing a deep dive into what our sources call the Racket-Instigator Model.
And it's a radical framework because it synthesizes two theories from the 20th century that seem, on the surface, to be worlds apart.
Right. On one hand, you have this sharp economic critique from, of all people, Major General Smedley Butler, one of the most decorated U.S. Marines in history.
From his book, War is a Racket. And we're marrying that with a sociological principle from L. Ron Hubbard, which he termed the third party law.
Now, our mission for you, the listener, is to provide a kind of structural lens, a new way to view modern conflicts that goes way beyond the visible battlefield.
The goal really is to shift your analysis from that simple, very emotional us versus them binary
to a triangular structure that involves a hidden, profitable side C,
which we're going to call the Profiteering Third Party, or PTP for short.
And the synthesis is, it's almost deceptively simple when you lay it out.
It is. It says modern conflict is a three-part system. You have an unseen entity, the instigator, that is actively manufacturing and maintaining friction between two other parties.
All for the purpose of what?
For the purpose of extracting massive economic or political capital. That's the racket.
So if you see a conflict that just won't resolve, if peace talks fail over and over again...
The model says that's not an accident. That is proof that the struggle is functioning exactly as intended for whoever is supplying the hardware or the financing or waiting in the wings with the reconstruction contracts.
So let's start with the foundation, the economic engine of this model, the why of conflict as laid out by Smedley Butler.
This is so critical because of who Butler was. This wasn't some academic in an ivory tower.
No, not at all. He was a two-time Medal of Honor recipient. He was the real deal. And he wrote, War is a Racket after 33 years in the Marine Corps.
And he didn't frame it as a critique. He framed it as a confession. He famously called himself a high-class muscle man for big business.
That's an incredible statement from a man like him. It gives so much weight to how he defines a racket.
It does. He says a racket is something that is not what it seems to the majority of the people. He's saying right off the bat there's deception involved.
And the mechanisms behind it are only really known by a small, an inside group.
Right, but the critical component, the thing that makes it a racket, is the distribution of costs and benefits. It's conducted for the benefit of the very few at the expense of the very many.
And that reframing it immediately changes how you have to evaluate any conflict, doesn't it?
Completely. You're forced to stop looking at it through the political lens of sovereignty or borders or ideology.
And instead, you have to adopt this purely transactional lens. You're looking for profit, for resource extraction, for debt generation. War stops being a tragic necessity.
And it becomes a commercial venture, a business.
And what's the product being sold?
Pure destruction. And what makes it such a brilliant business model in the most cynical way imaginable is that the product guarantees repeat business.
I see. Because unlike selling, say, a refrigerator that's built to last.
Exactly. If you sell destruction, you guarantee an immediate need for replacement orders for reconstruction contracts and for continued sales of weapons to both sides. It's a self-sustaining demand generator.
Butler gets really specific about who the players are in this racket. He defines two distinct classes.
He does, and the gap between them is everything. First, you have the inside group. This is the minority.
Your bankers, defense contractors, lobbyists, the politicians who control state debt and the means of destruction.
And crucially, they know what the fight is really about. For them, it's about market share, it's about contracts, it's about resource control.
Then you have the other class, The majority.
The vast paying public, that's the citizens who pay for the whole venture through taxes and the inflation that comes from war debt, and of course the soldiers who pay the ultimate price.
And what do they believe they're fighting for?
They're led to believe it's for democracy or freedom or national security, noble causes.
And this highlights the absolute core of the problem, right?
Right.
The thing that lets the racket continue. It's information asymmetry.
That's the perfect term for it. The inside group is looking at a balance sheet, a cold, pragmatic calculation of return on investment.
While the majority is watching a highly emotional, moral drama play out on their screens, believing completely in the righteousness of their cause.
And the racket depends, utterly, on maintaining that gap in understanding. Because if the public ever realized that the moral struggle they're invested in is just cover for a commercial acquisition,
the whole system would just collapse. Our sources use this analogy of a corrupt casino. I think it's very powerful.
it is. The players, that's the public, they think they're in a fair game. They think there are rules, there's a chance to win.
But the house, the inside group, they've rigged the machines. They've adjusted the odds.
And they secretly collect a percentage of every loss, every failure, every casualty. So the longer the public stays at the table, the more desperate their losses become.
The more reliably the house profits.
Right.
They're not selling a chance to win. They're selling the hope of winning while guaranteeing their own returns.
And look, to ground this, Butler wasn't just speculating. He was an auditor. He did the forensic accounting on World War I.
He used public and private balance sheets to prove, with hard numbers, that the war functioned as the greatest economic stimulus package in history.
But a stimulus package that was custom-tailored for very specific, captured sectors of the economy.
The numbers he presented are, they're almost hard to believe. They're what turn his argument from an opinion into a factual indictment.
Let's look at the corporate profit growth he found during World War I, the International Nickel Company. They provided key alloys for the steel used in guns and armor.
What was their increase?
An astonishing 1,700% profit increase.
1,700%. That's not normal market growth. That's a structural shift. That's a racket.
And the list just goes on. It covers the entire supply chain of destruction, the DuPonts, who made powder and explosives.
Let me guess. A huge jump.
A 950% increase in profits. The Central Leather Company, making boots, saddles, all the military supplies. They saw an increase of 1,100%.
So when you see figures like that, it leads you to Butler's really deeply cynical conclusion?
It does. That for the inside group, the ones counting those dividends, peace isn't the goal. Peace isn't success.
Peace is a catastrophic market failure.
Exactly. If your entire financial model is based on a 1,700% return generated by global destruction, you are structurally, economically, and institutionally opposed to stability. You need the conflict to continue.
This logic even extends down to the very mechanism of production itself. Butler uncovered this idea he called engineered inefficiency.
Right. In a normal civilian economy, the goal is always efficiency. You want to get more for less.
But in a war racket, the opposite is true.
Inefficiency is what drives profit, because the state is what you'd call a captured, non-price-sensitive consumer. So the more material that is destroyed or wasted or just made useless,
The more has to be manufactured and bought, guaranteeing those replacement orders and extending the product cycle.
the goal isn't the utility of the item. It's the contract payment itself.
And the examples he found are just staggering in their absurdity. I mean, let's talk about the famous shoe scandal.
Oh, that one is a classic. The manufacturer sold 35 million pairs of shoes.
For an army of how many?
Only 4 million soldiers, which on paper means every soldier was supplied with nearly 9 pairs of brand new boots.
Which is ludicrous. It wasn't about equipping the troops.
No, it was about maximizing the procurement contract for the leather industry.
We also saw the mosquito netting scandal.
Right. 20 million nets sold for troops who were operating in regions that had no mosquitoes. It's just buying irrelevant equipment to move volume and cash the check.
But the most outrageous had to be the ship scandal.
Oh, by far.
Yeah.
This was $635 million worth of wooden ships built under government contract that were so poorly constructed.
They wouldn't float.
They literally wouldn't float. They sank when they were launched or just rotted in the docks. They never saw action.
But the key detail is that someone signed off on them. Someone approved the payment.
Yes. The inefficiency was disguised as wartime urgency or manufacturing errors. But structurally, it was necessary to maximize the financial transaction. The taxpayer ate the loss, and the contractor walked away with profit.
So, okay, that's the economic racket. War as a commercial enterprise where profit is maximized through waste, but now we need the other half, the mechanism. How is this destruction manufactured and maintained against what you'd think is a natural impulse toward peace?
And this is where we bring in the second pillar of the model. This is the sociological machinery that ensures the racket can actually ignite and then sustain itself. It's L. Ron Hubbard's axiom, the third-party law.
Okay, let's stop there for a second. I need to push back on this. Our sources are merging a highly decorated, universally respected general's analysis with a principle from a very controversial figure. Why should we treat this sociological law seriously?
That's a completely fair and essential question. And the answer is, we have to treat it seriously purely for its diagnostic utility as a structural model. We have to set aside the source and just look at the mechanics it proposes.
Okay, so what does the axiom actually state?
It's stated very formally, almost like a geometric proof. It says, a third party must be present and unknown in every quarrel for a conflict to exist.
So it's immediately challenging that binary view we talked about, the idea that conflict is just party A versus party B.
Exactly. It's a radical claim. The law basically posits that sustained conflict between two parties is fundamentally unnatural.
Unnatural? How so?
The idea is that if you leave them alone, communication or exhaustion or just mutual agreement would cause almost any two-party dispute to burn itself out and resolve.
So if a conflict doesn't resolve, if it persists, if it seems irrational, if it resists all diplomatic pressure...
That is the forensic proof. It's evidence that a hidden agent is actively in there maintaining the friction.
Okay, so let's break down the core components of this profiteering third party, this PTP, because it sounds like they define the rules of the game.
There are three, and they're all critical. First is presence. Side C isn't just a passive observer watching from the sidelines.
They're an active participant. They're in the environment, providing funding or weapons or intelligence.
Again, and this is the absolute critical variable that makes the whole model work, is unknownness.
They have to stay hidden.
Completely undetected by the two sides that are actually fighting. The sources are crystal clear on this. The moment side A and side B discover the role of side C, the true instigator,
What happens?
they immediately stop fighting each other. And they unite against the newly discovered common enemy. The profit stream for the PTP stops dead.
And the third component.
Active production. Side C doesn't just sit back and hope for a fight. They have to actively and continuously manufacture the quarrel.
How do they do that?
By feeding reasons to fight to both sides. The sources call these false reports. It's psychological manipulation on a massive scale.
So the instigator is telling party A that party B is planning some treacherous attack or stealing their water.
Right, feeding them specific localized grievances. And at the same time, they're whispering in Party B's ear that Party A despises them, is planning an invasion, or is culturally hostile. They weaponize the lack of direct communication between A and B.
And what's crucial here, I imagine, is the camouflage that the third party has to wear.
Oh, absolutely. They almost never appear as a villain or an aggressor. That would expose them instantly.
So they masquerade as, what, a reasonable bystander?
Or a neutral mediator. Or, and this is the most insidious one, a concerned ally who is just providing defensive security assistance.
This camouflage lets them deny any real involvement while they're secretly funding or arming the dispute.
In today's world, that camouflage is often a defense-funded think tank, or an objective military analyst on the news who provides biased information under the guise of geopolitical necessity. They are the true ventriloquists.
Let's stick with that analogy of the ventriloquist for a second. It's powerful. You have this person at a dinner party throwing their voice to make it sound like two guests are insulting each other.
Right. And the guests, they get furious. They start fighting, believing the insults are genuine.
And that fight will continue for as long as the guests are looking at each other.
But the whole ruse collapses. It fails the moment the guests stop looking at each other and instead look at the ventriloquist and realize where the friction is actually coming from.
No, this structural insight, it's not totally unique to this third-party law, is it?
Not at all. It correlates very strongly with established sociological concepts, specifically Georg Simmel's concept of tertius caudens,
Which is Latin for
the rejoicing third. Simmel analyzed how a third actor can deliberately incite or exploit a conflict between two others to prevent them from uniting, or to exhaust their resources, leaving the third party dominant and richer.
Here's where I still struggle with this a bit. Isn't this model, I don't know, a little too cynical? Isn't it possible that Party A and Party B just genuinely hate each other for real historical reasons? And Side C is just taking advantage of that friction.
And the sources would agree that historical grievances are the raw material. They're the fuel. But the third-party law dictates that if that conflict persists way past the point where mutual exhaustion should have led to a truce, or if the solutions being proposed are deliberately irrational and self-defeating.
Then that's the sociological proof that an instigator is present and active.
Exactly. The instigator doesn't create the grievance from thin air. They find a dormant grievance and they weaponize it. They maintain it for profit.
And this has historical precedent.
Deep precedent. Our sources point to German intelligence in 1917, acting as the unknown third party. They secretly financed Vladimir Lenin, that's Party A, and got him back into Russia.
To do what?
To destabilize and overthrow the Tsarist government, which was Party B. To the world, it just looked like an internal struggle, the Russian Revolution.
But the third party, Germany, was instigating it for a very specific reason.
A purely selfish one. They financed the collapse to close the Eastern Front during World War I so they could move their troops to the West. They manufactured chaos in a rival nation to secure a strategic advantage.
Which again reinforces the purely mechanical nature of how you resolve this.
It does. Since anonymity is the key to the whole Racket-Instigator model, the peace mechanism is defined by one thing: exposure.
The conflict can only be resolved by identifying and exposing the hidden third party.
Because once that external pressure, that source of the instability and the false reports, is made known to A and B, their motivation to keep fighting each other it evaporates. They stop swinging at shadows and realize the true source of their misery.
So now we merge them. We take these two powerful, admittedly very cynical lenses.
Butler's massive profit motive, the racket.
And Hubbard's specific mechanics of how you generate and maintain friction, the instigator.
And you get the unified Racket-Instigator model.
And this framework really asks us to stop seeing conflict as a series of chaotic random events and start seeing it as a manufacturing process.
Right. The third party isn't some shadowy abstract figure anymore. They are an institutional racketeer, the Profiteering Third Party, the PTP.
And their sole motivation is economic extraction, the racket, which they achieve by manufacturing and maintaining friction, the instigator.
It's a single, unified purpose.
Okay, so let's clearly define the resulting tripartite structure for everyone listening.
First, you have the visible conflict. This is the theater. It's Nation A versus Nation B. It's the daily headlines about ideology, borders, national interest.
Then second, you have the hidden instigator, the third party.
This is the PTP. It could be a private military company, a foreign intelligence agency, a transnational corporation, or even the military-industrial complex of a major power. It's the entity that ignites those dormant grievances and provides the means to fight.
And the final piece, the fuel that runs the whole engine and the objective of the game,
is the racket. The motivation. This is the specific capital being extracted. It could be arms sales, resource rights, debt financing, reconstruction contracts.
And this whole system isn't random. It operates in a closed loop, what the sources call the cycle of perpetual instigation. It runs through 4 distinct managed phases.
Phase 1 is instigation. The PTP identifies a target region.
And this region always has 2 things, right? A key resource oil, minerals, a strategic port.
And crucially, political barriers. Things like strong state sovereignty, environmental regulation, things that prevent cheap and easy extraction.
So the instigator begins these preparatory operations.
Influence campaigns, massive lobbying, and critically, something called astroturfing.
Which is what?
Using fake online personas, bots, propaganda outlets to manufacture the appearance of grassroots outrage. They create fake internal divisions to fuel tension between local factions. They inject the false reports designed to break down those political barriers.
And once the violence finally erupts, we move into phase 2, conflict.
At which point, the immediate #1 goal for the PTP shifts to maintaining its unknownness.
This is where information warfare comes in. Strategic media narratives.
The narratives become highly simplified, very emotional. They focus intensely on triggers like ancient ethnic hatreds, or saving democracy, or eliminating a terrorist threat.
Why those narratives?
To ensure the public and the soldiers focus entirely on the perceived binary fight A versus B, and not on the external forces that provided the funding, the weapons, or the narrative cover in the first place. The instigator must be the one delivering the news, or funding the organization that delivers it.
Which leads right into phase 3, the racket. Once the violence is sustained, the inside group can start to profit massively.
And we see 2 main extraction mechanisms working at the same time. The first is artificial demand.
The constant, profitable need to sell new weapons, new hardware, new supplies to one or even both sides of the conflict.
And the second mechanism is disaster capitalism.
The ability to extract resources or seize assets on the cheap because the conflict has destroyed the regulatory state, the central government, and the rule of law.
Exactly. Destruction, as Butler taught us, is just the product cycle that guarantees your replacement orders.
Which brings us to the most insidious phase, the one that guarantees this goes on and on. Phase 4, stasis, or managed instability.
Here, the PTP works diligently to make sure neither side, not Party A, not Party B, achieves a total victory.
Why? Why wouldn't they want their side to win?
Because a clear resolution, a final victory, represents a total immediate lost revenue event. The war ends, the racket ends.
So the instigator prefers the conflict to just simmer indefinitely.
Right. Just below the threshold of total collapse, but hot enough to justify continuous security spending and resource extraction. And if a real peace process starts to gain momentum,
the PTP will actively sabotage it.
With new, highly convincing false reports. Maybe it's propaganda, a staged attack, or some fabricated intelligence designed to make reconciliation look too dangerous, or too naive, or too expensive.
The analogy for this entire closed loop is it's perfect for understanding the model.
The subscription-based security service.
Right. The company that sells you an alarm system but is also secretly picking your locks at night and then sending you alerts about suspicious activity.
They don't want your house to burn down. They need you, the client, alive to pay the monthly fee.
But they absolutely do not want the burglar to get caught, because that would eliminate the need for their service.
They want a perpetual state of managed insecurity that justifies their role as the trusted provider of the solution. Now, this whole Racket-Instigator model, it sounds like it requires some kind of hidden, clandestine actor, spies, mercenaries, covert ops.
But our sources show that the profiteering third party often achieves its best camouflage by operating completely in the open.
By institutionalizing itself through systemic structures. And the most crucial, most effective structure is the revolving door.
The revolving door. This is the bridge that seamlessly merges the state's military and regulatory leadership. That's Party A with the private industrial interests, Party C.
It's how the inside group keeps control over both the policy that creates the war and the industry that supplies the war.
So how does it work, specifically?
It's when high-ranking military officials, we're talking generals, admirals, senior Pentagon procurement officials, when they retire, they immediately join the boards or the consulting arms or the lobbying firms of the very same defense contractors they were just regulating.
The ones they were awarding billion-dollar contracts to.
Exactly. And that movement effectively merges the state, Party A, and the industrial racket, Party C, into a single entity with the same financial interests.
And this creates a powerful systemic financial incentive for strategic instigation before they even retire.
Of course. A government official, whether they're conscious of it or not, may start to favor more hawkish policies, bigger budgets, more military confrontations.
Because they're trying to secure a future, very lucrative board seat or lobbying job.
And these post-government jobs are staggeringly profitable. The sources note they can pay as much as $500,000 a year for what is often minimal work. It's essentially deferred compensation for favors they rendered while they were in office.
So this legalized incentive structure makes being a hawk a financially rational career move.
This is the ultimate form of camouflage. The revolving door legalizes and institutionalizes the third party.
So the instigation isn't coming from some shadowy figure in an alley. It's coming from a recently retired 4-star general or a senior fellow at a contractor-funded think tank.
And the public views them as offering objective, patriotic military advice.
This just perfectly reinforces that information asymmetry that Butler identified.
It does. The public thinks they're hearing advocates for national security. But in reality, they're often hearing the sales pitch of a third-party salesman who has a massive, guaranteed financial stake in escalating the conflict.
And the engine that translates this financial incentive into actual policy, into the friction itself, that's lobbying.
Lobbying is the transmission belt. It transforms the corporate profit motive into official national foreign policy.
And just look at the sheer scale of the investment here. The sources highlight that the defense sector employs nearly 2 professional lobbyists for every single member of Congress.
That ratio alone tells you the government isn't just receiving advice. It is being structurally overwhelmed and captured by the advocates for perpetual conflict spending.
And what makes it a clear racket is the undeniable return on investment.
An analysis of the 20-year war in Afghanistan showed that the top defense firms saw a stunning $2 trillion return on an investment of roughly $1 billion in lobbying over those 2 decades.
$2 trillion.
The ROI is astronomical. It's $2,000 back for every $1 you invest. It tells you exactly why the system resists any attempt at reform. Why would you ever stop a service that provides such reliable, massive returns?
And the structural instigation, it needs intellectual cover. It needs those false reports to justify the spending.
Which is where the think tank industrial complex comes in. This complex acts as the third party in the world of ideas. It engages in what we can call narrative laundry.
Narrative laundry. Okay, let's follow the money trail that cleans the story.
Step 1. A major defense contractor, like a Raytheon or General Dynamics, becomes a primary, often anonymous donor to an influential DC think tank.
Step 2. That think tank then produces a seemingly nonpartisan objective report, the false report, warning the nation of, say, an impending missile gap or a rising threat from some corner of the world.
Step 3. The media cites this report extensively, often without ever questioning the funding, framing it as objective analysis from leading experts.
And step 4. Congress then uses that specific report to justify massive budget increases for the specific weapon systems that are manufactured by the original donor.
The think tank is the hidden promoter. They manufacture a threat perception that benefits the racketeer, giving the intellectual justification for the instability that the defense sector profits from. The whole structure is designed to hide the financial interest behind the objective military advice.
So the analogy holds up. The referee of the national security game retires to become an executive for the team they just officiated. The revolving door turns regulators into agents for the merchants of war, making the conflict itself the guaranteed contract. So to really make this framework useful, we have to move it from theory into practice. We have to apply this Racket-Instigator model to active geopolitical crises.
Right, because when you shift your focus away from the visible fighters, A and B, and you start looking for the hidden profiteering third party side C, the true dynamics of these conflicts they snap into focus.
You're using it as a diagnostic tool. If the conflict seems irrational, if it resists being resolved, and if someone is making immense profits, we look for side C.
Let's start with case study Alpha, the absolute tragedy unfolding in Sudan.
The visible conflict there is framed as a civil war between 2 rival generals. You have the Sudanese armed forces, the SF, versus the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF. The public story is all about a struggle for democratic transition and internal power.
But the PTP analysis immediately asks, who is supplying the sustained friction? Who is keeping this fire going? And the hidden third party here is clearly the Wagner Group, or its successor Africa Corps. They are the active instigator.
The timeline is what gives it away. The RSF leader, Hemedti, he flew to Moscow right after the 2022 Ukraine invasion and secured his alliance.
And after that, Wagner provided the RSF with advanced military training, material support, and even sophisticated hardware like surface-to-air missile systems. By giving one side the ability to escalate beyond the national military's capability, Wagner made sure the conflict would explode.
So what's the racket? What are they extracting?
Gold. Wagner operates its extraction business through a corporate shell company called Moreau Gold. And through their alliance with the RSF, Wagner secured access to the incredibly lucrative Jebel Amer gold mines in Darfur. They essentially privatized a key Sudanese national resource.
And this gold is the capital extraction. Sources have tracked the logistics.
They have. Yeah. Some drive 30 to 40 flights a month, carrying illicit gold smuggled out of the country. It moves through a refinery in Dubai and then on to Russia.
And that gold is used to prop up the Russian ruble and finance other conflicts, bypassing international sanctions. It's a pure extraction economy.
So the PTP conclusion is unavoidable. The Sudan conflict is a resource pump engineered by Wagner, who is side C. The RSF is their armed security and extraction subcontractor, that's Party B, fighting the state forces, Party A.
And peace. Peace would restore state control over those mines.
Which would end Moreau Gold's billions in profits. Therefore, Wagner's structural incentive is to keep the war between the SIF and RSF simmering indefinitely. They need that regulatory vacuum to continue the cheap extraction.
Okay, case study Beta, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, a region just defined by this deeply persistent, seemingly intractable violence.
And the visible conflict involves over 100 armed groups fighting the Congolese army. And the international media almost always frames this as ancient ethnic or tribal conflicts.
Which masks the underlying economic drivers.
Completely. The racket that's fueling this persistence is the global, insatiable demand for 3TG conflict minerals. Tin, tungsten, tantalum, also known as coltan and gold.
These are the materials that are essential for virtually every piece of consumer electronics. Our smartphones, our laptops, the growing EV industry.
And the scale of this illicit extraction is just astonishing. We have data points showing the M23 rebel group generates roughly $300,000 a month just from their control of the Rabaya Coltan mine alone.
For these armed groups, controlling a single mine can fund an entire militia for years.
So who is the third party? It's not a single mercenary group this time. It's a structural entity. Our sources identify the global tech industry and its supply chain as the unknown third party.
And this is a case of what you'd call instigation by negligence.
Exactly. The global tech industry, Side C, isn't on the ground arming these groups. But by continuing to purchase these raw minerals, which are systematically smuggled and laundered as conflict-free through neighboring states like Rwanda, the market creates an endless, reliable, massive financial incentive for the violence to continue.
So the armed groups become, in effect, mining subcontractors. Their violence is what ensures the supply chain remains cheap and unregulated.
The UN panel of experts says this over and over again. The flow of arms and the exploitation of resources are inextricably linked. Regulations like the U.S. Conflict Minerals Rule from 2012 only caused the smuggling networks to adapt their routes.
It just confirms the resilience of the racket. As long as the market, Side C, provides the capital, the militias, Sides A and B, will keep fighting for control of the mines. The PTP, in this case, is the global consumer market. Okay, our final case study shows how a single transnational corporation can actually become the instigator. We're looking at the tensions between Venezuela and Guyana over the Essequibo region.
The visible conflict is Venezuela resurrecting this century-old claim. It's all framed as nationalism and territorial sovereignty.
But as PTP analysts, we have to look at the timing.
And the conflict escalation correlates precisely with the activities of the third-party instigator, ExxonMobil. This isn't circumstantial. The model says it's cause and effect.
So what happened?
In 2015, ExxonMobil discovered massive oil reserves, over 11 billion barrels, in the disputed Stabroek Block. It transformed Guyana into a potential petrostate overnight.
But the contract Guyana signed with Exxon has been widely criticized.
Globally, as being exceptionally favorable to the corporation. It extracts very little revenue for the Guyanese people. It's a classic corporate racket.
And this massive investment creates what the sources call a geopolitical capture.
It forces the U.S. government to extend a security umbrella over Guyana, Party A, to protect American interests, which really just means Exxon's assets.
And Venezuela, Party B, sees this aggressive drilling in disputed waters as an unacceptable provocation by a corporate empire.
And that prevents any real diplomatic settlement. But the tension actually benefits ExxonMobil directly. A fearful Guyana is highly dependent on Exxon's influence in Washington for its survival.
Which means the government is far less likely to try and renegotiate that highly lucrative but very unfavorable oil contract.
Exactly. ExxonMobil leverages the external Venezuelan threat to secure its profit margins against the Guyanese public interest. The corporation is the instigator, performing the provocative act drilling in disputed territory, and then leveraging the resulting conflict to secure the racket, which is the favorable contract.
Okay, so if the diagnosis is that these persistent conflicts are engineered for profit, then the cure has to be a structural intervention. It has to be designed to decouple that profit motive from the friction.
And both Butler and Hubbard, the founders of these two pillars, they offered solutions that, when you combine them, create a kind of roadmap for de-escalation that targets the PTP directly.
Let's start with Butler's solution. It targets the racket itself. He called for the total conscription of capital.
It's a radical idea. He argued that before you conscript a single young man to pay with his life, the nation must first conscript the capital, the industry, and the labor that profits from the war.
His demand was incredibly simple. He said officers of defense corporations, bankers, speculators, they must all be restricted to the exact same low monthly income as a common soldier in the trenches.
He specifically named $30 a month in 1935. The goal is crystal clear. Make sure that no one, anywhere, builds a private fortune from the economics of blood.
So how do you apply that to the modern world?
It translates to structural economic deterrence. One proposal is a 100% excess profits tax, EPT, on all defense contractors during wartime. You can keep your normal peacetime profits, but anything above that, anything driven by war demand, goes straight back to the state.
Or you could have a more graduated tax, right?
A war stuff excess profits tax of, say, 40–50% on all profits that exceed a reasonable 5% peacetime baseline during a conflict. The whole objective is to cap the financial upside of a long war. remove the PTP's incentive to lobby for escalation.
The analogy for this is it's perfect for understanding the political power of this policy.
It's like telling the owner of a fire extinguisher factory that during a fire, they have to serve as a volunteer firefighter for zero pay.
They'd suddenly find a way to put that fire out very quickly and efficiently,
instead of letting it simmer to maximize sales of replacement extinguishers.
Okay, so that's Butler's solution for the racket. What about Hubbard's for the instigator?
His is just as direct. Since anonymity is the critical variable that keeps the quarrel going, peace is only achieved by actively hunting for and exposing the third party.
So peace negotiations have to fundamentally change their focus.
They have to pivot. Stop just monitoring the enemy, A and B, where you assume every action is hostile, and start monitoring your allies, your neutrals, and the financial intermediaries, side C, who are profiting from the chaos. You have to hunt the PTP in the shadows of the negotiations.
And that requires a total shift in mindset. We have to stop thinking like soldiers or diplomats.
And start thinking like forensic detectives. And luckily, the digital age gives us tools that Butler and Hubbard could have only dreamed of for tracking the instigator.
We're calling these the modern tools for the PTP analyst.
First, financial forensics. Follow the money isn't just a physical trail anymore.
It's using blockchain analysis, leaked banking data like the Panama Papers, to trace who is moving money out of a conflict zone and where it's being laundered.
Second, open source intelligence, or OSINT, using publicly available data to bypass the official narratives entirely.
High-resolution satellite imagery to track illegal mining, flight trackers to spot unauthorized arms shipments.
Maritime data to monitor oil exploration vessels in disputed waters, just like in the Guyana case.
And third, mapping the financial influence itself.
Using lobbying databases like Open Secrets, these tools let us empirically map the influence network. You can draw a direct, documented line from a specific contractor's donation to the think tank they fund to a specific hawkish vote in Congress. You connect the instigator's investment to the racket's return.
So if you combine these historical solutions with modern tools, our sources suggest a few key policy proposals for decoupling profit.
The first one is an anti-revolving door moratorium. This would legally bar high-ranking military and government officials from joining defense contractor boards for a substantial period, like 10 years.
That immediately removes the financial incentive for them to advocate for policies that secure their future $500,000 board seat.
Then you have to counter the narrative laundry with absolute transparency. Mandatory funding disclosures for think tanks.
So any report or policy paper on a conflict has to have a clear funded by contractor name watermark right on the front page.
It immediately exposes the third-party salesman who is masquerading as an objective expert.
And finally, to address the geopolitical prize of energy conflicts like we're seeing in Ukraine.
A policy of war-neutral energy pricing. This would mandate that critical energy exports to allies be sold at pre-war cost-plus rates instead of letting energy firms sell at speculative spot market prices.
Which removes the multi-billion-dollar incentive for energy firms to see the conflict prolonged for massive profits.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. The model predicts that if these policies were actually put in place, the PTP wouldn't just disappear. It would engage in systemic adaptation. It would evolve to survive.
How?
Through regulatory capture. They would immediately lobby for broad, patriotic national security exceptions to any excess profits tax. They'd say it stifles innovation, that they can't afford the R&D to defeat the enemy without maximum profits.
They'd frame the profit motive itself as patriotism.
And if transparency is mandated, they move to information laundering. They'd shift funding from direct contractor donations to layered nonprofits or educational trusts with neutral, humanitarian-sounding names. The report is still biased, but the financial trail is now obscured to keep the third party unknown.
And what if profit caps are too tight?
They could use the hostage supply chain strategy, deliberately slow down production, claim unforeseen supply chain disruptions, and essentially threaten the fighting forces with a hardware shortage unless the government grants them emergency, high-profit contracts that bypass the new rules.
So the ultimate synthesis here is that the third party is self-correcting. It mutates to survive transparency, which means policy alone is not enough.
Which is why the real key to peace, according to the sources, is the shift in consciousness. The moment the public stops seeing conflict as a simple emotional binary, yes versus them, and starts seeing it as a triangle.
Us versus them versus the racket.
That is the moment the third party loses its single most powerful weapon, its anonymity.
And that shift requires constant active vigilance. This is why the concept of a PTP conflict scorecard is so valuable for you, the listener. It's a citizen's guide to identifying the false reports that are hidden in plain sight.
It forces you to ask, who wrote this article? Who is paying the expert being cited? What is the specific financial benefit if this story continues tomorrow?
You look for specific criteria, right? You score an article high if the expert has a documented revolving door link, or if the article frames peace as surrender, or if it advocates for escalation while erasing any mention of the cost to the taxpayer or the PTP's profit margin.
So what does this all mean? The core idea of the Racket-Instigator model is that if a conflict persists, if it acts irrationally, if it consistently resists a resolution, that is definitive proof that a hidden agent is actively maintaining the friction for specific, calculable profit.
Your mission as an informed citizen is to stop looking only at the visible enemy, side B, and start looking forensically at the inside group, side C, the ones counting the dividends of the slaughter.
And recognizing that the merchants of war often wear the camouflage of patriotism or objective expertise.
And so we leave you with this final provocative thought based on the entire framework. The most dangerous question you can ask when watching the news isn't the historical question, who started the war?
But rather the forensic question. Who benefits financially, specifically, from this headline continuing tomorrow?
If you can follow that line of inquiry, you are no longer a passive observer of the conflict. You are an active forensic detective.